In 1923, a reporter asked George Mallory why did he want to climb Mount Everest. His answer has become famous and is still talked about today because he replied, "Because it is there." Welcome to Candlewick Library. I'm Cheryl. On May 29th, 1953, Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay summited Mount Everest for the first time, as far as we know. Last week, I read 2 books about Mount Everest back to back, and I also visited a little free library and just happened to find another book about Mount Everest during that time. So I thought this would be a really fun thing to make a video about, just books about Mount Everest. And this is a very small list. I haven't read extensively about Mount Everest, so you can help by also adding any recommendations you might have in the comments. When I realized that Hillary and Norgay had got to the summit on May 29th, I felt like that was perfect timing after having just read these books. So I wanted to celebrate that today, 72 years later, and recommend some books about Everest that I have read. First, for the youngest readers, a couple of years ago, I read Totally True Adventures, Climbing Everest, How Heroes Reach the Earth's Highest Peak, and this is by Gail Herman. I've talked about the Totally True Adventure books before. I think these are really well done. I think we have all of them that have been published. There haven't been a ton, and I have enjoyed all of them. And this one really interested me. It has real pictures in it as well as just illustrations. And it tells the story about Everest and about the beginnings of the quest to be the first person to summit the mountain. It tells us all about George Mallory, who I quoted at the beginning of this video. It really looked as if he would be the first man to summit the mountain, but he died. It actually is unknown whether he got to the top first and died on the way back down, or if he never reached it. Based on some information in one of the books, I believe that they never found his camera. And if they did, that would be the one piece that would tell us whether he got to the top or not. But at this point, it is very unlikely they will ever find that information. And so we just have to go with the first person that got to the top, that descended without dying, so we know for sure that they got there. So there is a possibility that George Mallory was the first. But this tells his story, and then it tells the story of the 2 men who were the first on the top of the mountain. And then it also gives more information on other people that have climbed since. And one of the things I really liked in the back is that there is a map that shows Mallory's route and Hillary and Tenzing's route. I feel like that if you were a kid reading this, that gives you a really good picture in your mind to flip back and forth to as you're reading. And then it also has the different records and first things on Everest. So the first to reach the top from the north side, the first American to reach the top, the first woman to reach the top, the first climb to the top without oxygen. It has the oldest and the youngest climbers to reach the top, the longest stay on the summit, which was 21 hours, which I cannot imagine after reading so much about it and knowing how cold it is up there and how dangerous the storms can be. I can't believe somebody, I'm going to butcher the name, but Babu Shariri Sherpa on May of 1999. And then the most people to reach the summit on one day was 234 on May 19th, 2012. That is something that is going to be a talking point for some of these books, so I'll come back to that. And the most climber deaths in one season was 15 in 1996, and that also is going to be addressed with one of the books I read. And then the most Sherpa deaths in one season was 16 in just one day on April 18th, 2014 in an avalanche. I'm wondering if anyone has written a book about them. Probably not. There's been a few things I've read about in these books that I wish somebody else would write a book about. So I'll talk a little bit about that as I go as well. Another book that I read quite a few years ago that became something that really stuck with me is Touch the Top of the World, A Blind Man's Journey to Climb Farther Than the Eye Can See by Eric Weyenmeyer. I found out about this book, I don't even remember when. It was a lot of years ago. I was driving down the freeway. I saw a billboard that had this picture on it, and it said, "Climbed Everest Blind." And I knew nothing about him. I knew nothing about his story, but it intrigued me. So I went to the library, I looked it up, found the book, read it, and then I was able to find this book later, thankfully, because I wanted my own copy. So in this book, wow. After reading it from the library, I wanted to have my own copy, and just this past year, I was in Pioneer Book in Provo, the used bookstore that was in my last video, and I found it there for $5.95, and I just opened this up and realized it is signed. So that's pretty fun. In this book, Eric tells the story of his childhood, his family, and his life leading up to his climbing of Mount Everest. And then he tells the story of his time on Mount Everest, obviously. It is such an inspiring and remarkable story. I can't imagine anyone doing this with sight, let alone blind. The things that they have to climb over. When you're reading in the books or you watch a show about it and you see the ladders that are across the crevices, these are huge drops. And they've got these what look like rickety ladders on going across it, and they have to get those special shoes just right on the rungs so that they don't fall off as they go across. Imagining somebody doing that and having to completely rely on the people that are with them. Everybody has to rely on the people that they're climbing with, but when they're not just your safety for their rope if you fall, but they're also your eyes and telling you where to step and how far over to go and how many inches you have to go. That takes a whole new level of trust and courage. It is just so remarkable. There are pictures in here as well of him as a child, as him growing up, when he was first beginning to climb mountains. I just find it such an inspiring book. There was a reality show quite a few years ago. It was kind of like An Amazing Race meets Survivor, because there were a bunch of teams and they had to do a bunch of adventurous things. I cannot remember what the name of that show was. I wish I would have thought to look it up before I made the video, but he was on that with a team with a couple of his buddies, and I was a little bit anxious to watch it, not knowing, okay, is he going to be as likable on the show as he is in his book, or is he going to ruin the illusion I have of him being a really nice guy? But he didn't. Him and his teammates were one of my two favorite teams. They were just such kind people, and it was so inspiring to watch him on that show as well, and his friends too. So I highly recommend this book. So before I get into the last two books, the one that I found at the little free library last week is this, Triumph on Everest. This is a photo biography of Sir Edmund Hillary by Broughton Coburn, and this is put out by the National Geographic Society. So this tells the story of Edmund Hillary, who along with the Sherpa was the first one on Mount Everest, and it just has his whole life story and pictures along the way. So I thought that was a really interesting one, and probably would be interesting to kids who are interested in Everest or are doing a report on it or something like that, because I love being able to see the pictures when it's a real thing. And now for the two books that started this whole idea. The reason I ended up unexpectedly reading these was because I was taking part in the Hike-a-thon readathon put on by the Brightside Girl. And a couple of the prompts, I changed a lot of the books that I was reading for different prompts along the way, but this one I for sure was going to be reading, One Wrong Step, and then I added the other one. I was a little bit apprehensive about One Wrong Step by Jennifer A. Nelson, just because the last two books had been a little bit disappointing to me. And so with this not being one of her historical fictions about war, I wondered if I would enjoy it as much or if it would be more like the Titanic, which I still thought was a good book, but I didn't feel like it was as strong. But this was classic Jennifer A. Nelson historical fiction. It was so good. I loved the characters. It really kept my interest the whole time. You have to go into it knowing that it's not going to be completely realistic, because having two teenagers that are trying to save people on Mount Everest and climbing certain parts of it where fully trained adults have died, yes, that can be a very unbelievable idea. However, she does what she's done in most of her books where I believed it. And I was able to understand it. And it wasn't without peril. They were in danger. We saw the things that went wrong because of their inexperience and their age. And we also saw the reasons that they were able to do the things they did based on their experience and the things that they learned other places. It's in the viewpoint of a young boy, Atlas Wade, and his mother has died, and he and his father climb mountains. And it all goes together. There's reasons for all of it because of the mother. So that is tied to the story. And it goes back and forth between telling his story of Everest and then also doing flashbacks that help you to see what's going on in the moment. Things that make him think of something else, or experiences he's had with people that you meet in the book, things like that. And I felt like that was a really good way to move the pace along without having all of the build-up before them getting to Everest. So getting to Everest almost right away and staying there, I felt like that really helped the pace of the book. But then you still get those flashbacks, and it keeps you reading because you want to get back to Everest, even though the flashbacks are interesting as well. There is a little bit of mystery involved of whether there are some Nazis here on the mountain with them. There is a theme of forgiveness and family. At the beginning of every chapter, there is also a word that will be used in some way in that chapter and a definition of it, so that if you are a middle grader or someone who doesn't know some of these mountain terms, that you will understand what it is when you get to it. Another thing that I really loved is that she had this map throughout the book, and it always showed with a little star where Atlas was at. So we could see the whole trail that his dad was going on with his teammates, and we could always see where Atlas was, but we didn't see where his dad was, because that's part of the story. And I loved that. I love when there are visuals that make sense in a book and help you to have some bearing of where the story is as you're reading it. So I think that anybody, child to adult, that is interested in Mount Everest would enjoy this book. And if you love Jennifer Nielsen's books, I think this would be one that you'll really enjoy. And another good thing about it is that it helped me in this book. The next one I read was Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. I've been wanting to read another book of his since reading Under the Banner of Heaven. And the reason that One Wrong Step helped me with this is because there are things explained in that book about the geography of Mount Everest and the things that they encounter that are dangerous that I actually didn't know about. I might have read them in one of the other books a long time ago, but I didn't remember them. And in this book, the people encounter the same things, but he didn't describe what they were. And so I knew what he was talking about because I just read One Wrong Step. I mean, you could have figured it out or looked it up if you were only reading this one, but it was just really fun that I understood right away what some of the jargon was. This tells the story of Jon Krakauer climbing Mount Everest. He was asked to write an article for Outside Magazine where he would climb Mount Everest. And so he was in quite a large team that did, and he was able to climb it, but this was the disaster. This is the one that was talked about in the other book, where it is the most climbers that have died in one season. A lot of the people on his team did die. This book was interesting, and I think it was good, but I did have a few problems with it. One is that because he was oxygen deprived for quite a while, we get the story from his perspective, but you know that it's not completely accurate. He even says that he wrote some things in the article right afterward that he later corrected for the book after talking to a lot of people. And there are some people involved in that climb that say that some of the other things still aren't exactly accurate. And it would be hard to be completely accurate when you remember something very clearly, but it might not be exactly what you thought it was because you weren't thinking clearly. With Under the Banner of Heaven and then another book by him that I also read this month, I found that I loved those books so much more than this one. And I think it's because he is really strong at researching other people's stories and putting the stories together and being able to tell them. But when it's his own story and he doesn't know for sure every detail of it, I think that makes it a lot harder for him to be able to tell the story accurately. And so I wouldn't recommend it as much as his other books, but I still think it was a good book. I don't think that it was something that shouldn't be read. The other thing that bothered me about it was that there were no pictures. And when I'm reading a nonfiction book, I really like to see pictures of the people and the places. But the other book I read by him this month did not either. And Under the Banner of Heaven did. So I'm wondering if it's a paperback thing, if he puts pictures in his hardbacks but not in his paperbacks. So I'll have to look into that. There were a few things that this book really made me think about. And one was, he said, reaching the top of Everest is supposed to trigger a surge of intense elation against long odds. After all, I had just attained a goal I'd coveted since childhood, but the summit was really only the halfway point. Any impulse I might have felt towards self-congratulation was extinguished by overwhelming apprehension about the long, dangerous descent that lay ahead. And that was one thing that, after reading all these books about Everest and going online and looking at some more things and watching a film that I'll talk about in a minute, when I think about climbing a mountain, I've climbed a few mountains here in Utah, and when you are doing the hike, you think of that top summit as the end point. That is the goal. Once you get there, you're done. You're excited to be there. You're looking at the view. It's wonderful. And then you're just coming back down. But with Everest, and I'm sure other mountains as well, it is so different. And what he says about it being only the halfway point is so true, because they are not out of danger. Once they reach that summit, they have to come back down, and it is just as dangerous as the going up. And in fact, most of the people that died in this book died on the way back down. And that is why I wonder if Mallory did reach the top and died on the way back down. A lot of people do. So that was something that I had never really thought about before. And then another thing he brings up is the kind of debate about whether people should be allowed to use oxygen on Everest or not. I really don't know how anybody does it without, but there are people that are spoken about in here that did it without. He talks about how the oxygen bottles are just thrown off to the side, that there's just big piles of garbage and oxygen bottles left behind by climbers. And in fact, the government instated I think it was a reward of some kind that they pay Sherpas for bringing back down oxygen bottles, but there's still going to be a lot of it. So the fact that climbing Mount Everest has become such a kind of trendy thing to do is kind of a sad thing in a way. While you want people to be able to attain this goal if it's something they think is really great, it also is causing a lot of damage to the mountain. It's causing a lot of unneeded deaths, unnecessary deaths, because people that maybe don't have any business climbing Mount Everest are climbing it. So he talks about how even though he had to use oxygen, and I don't know what would have happened to him if he hadn't used it, he talks about how because of being able to use oxygen, so many climbers who would have their body tell them that they have reached their physical limitations and they shouldn't go any further, keep going because they're not having that lack of oxygen and they might not be strong enough for this. And I thought that was an interesting point as well. I also feel like in the other book where it had the record number of climbers to climb, how this used to be something that was a very rare thing for people to do, and now you have hundreds of people climbing it. I think that for some people it's making it feel less special to them once they do it. I don't think it should be, because it's still such a hard thing that most people are not going to be able to do. I think it's so interesting to kind of dial in on the debates over these things of whether it's a good thing that there's more people that are interested in these different sports, people that probably have no business being at Mount Everest that are climbing it, or if it is minimizing it for some of the other people. I would love to hear your thoughts on that, if you think that it is something that they should try to limit. In the book, he talked a lot about how the government has periodically raised the fee for climbing and different rules about it, trying to get less people there because the government there is kind of overwhelmed with the amount of tourism that is happening because of it. John Krakauer talked about an IMAX team that was there at the same time that he was. So they were not on his team, but they were there in the camp. He talked about a few of the people on that team. So I knew that meant that there must be an IMAX movie that was made by those people. I didn't know if there was or not, if the events that happened had an effect on that, or if they really did put out a film. So I looked it up on YouTube and I was able to find it. It's called Everest. It's 47 minutes long and it's narrated by Liam Neeson. So that is how you'll know if you found the right thing. I just typed in IMAX Everest and that was really interesting too. And it showed some of the people that were talked about in Into Thin Air, which was great because, like I said, there were no pictures in the book. And it was really beautifully filmed, and you have those moments of seeing the ladders over the crevices, and I watch it and I think, I don't understand how anybody wants to do this. It is so scary, but also so interesting to watch. I do feel like there is a lot of talk about the main people that everybody knows, but in John Krakauer's group, there was a Japanese woman who was the oldest woman at that point to climb Mount Everest. There's been an older woman since then, and she was the second Japanese woman to do all 7 summits. And unfortunately, her story did not end well, but I think it would be so interesting to read a book just about her and her life, but there wasn't any. I searched and searched, and as much as I could tell, there wasn't anything like that. So I feel like that it is an area where there could be more books written about people that have taken on this big challenge. So I've really enjoyed diving a little bit deeper into the climbing of Mount Everest and thinking about books I have read before and the ones that I read this week. I would love to know if you have any books about Mount Everest or about any of the climbers that you would recommend. Leave those in the comments. Or if any of you have been to Mount Everest or have climbed to base camp or know anybody who has climbed to the top of Everest, I would love to know.